When someone falls asleep, what generally happens first?
I can tell you are not a novice there, Eric. It looks, obviously you've done your reading.
Welcome back to the Aging Backward, Growing Forward podcast. I'm your host, Eric Casabiri, and I'm thrilled to have a special guest with me this week on an amazing topic that I told you we're going to dive a little bit deeper on. We have Dr. Meeta Singh, who in my opinion is one of the best sleep experts you could find. I met Dr. Singh through some friends of ours, some colleagues, and I listened to her speak, and I said, this is the person we want to bring on the podcast. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Meeta Singh. Hi, doctor. How are you?
Not too bad. Thank you, Eric. And thank you for giving me a platform. And thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Doctor, give us a little background. Tell us about your education and your experience.
Okay. So I am a board certified psychiatrist and a sleep medicine specialist. I did my training at Mayo Clinic too many years ago. We don't have to go into that. So I did my training at Mayo Clinic and then came to the Henry Ford Health System where I did a sleep fellowship. And for many years, I worked at the Henry Ford Health System where I built their sleep for sports athletes program, right? So athletes, they are high functioning. They always want to, especially pro athletes, they want to be at their very best, and optimizing their sleep is what gets them there. So that was the program I built. And then a few years ago, I set up my own practice. So traditionally, the way that healthcare system is built is that you wait for somebody to get a sleep disorder, right? Wait for them to fall sick before you decide you want to go and treat it. And we know that the three pillars of health are, diet, exercise, and sleep. So we don't need to wait for somebody to fall in. We don't need for somebody to get a diagnosable sleep disorder. We can start optimizing and keep them healthy. And that's the focus of my practice.
So, doctor, tell me, what made you dive into sleep specifically? When you started in getting into medicine and you did all this amazing training, how did you niche yourself? Like, what inspired you to go that direction?
So that's a really interesting question because I'm a psychiatrist by training. And in that last year of training at Mayo Clinic, they ask you you do these rotations. And one of the rotations was sleep medicine. I decided to do that because I'm like, how busy can it be? Give me something to do, right? But it is absolutely fascinating, Eric. And as you know, sleep is such a mysterious and exciting field to be in. I mean, you cannot walk into a room and almost everybody will say, well, I have a sleep issue, or I want to learn more about sleep. So that's how I started. And Henry Ford was and is one of almost the best places to train in sleep medicine. When I trained there, the head of research was Dr. Thomas Roth, who's like the grandfather of sleep medicine. He's one of the editors of the main sleep textbook.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty amazing experience. And I had been working with the top executives at the three big car companies here because there was traveling and there was jet lag, etc. So advising them, and it just so happened that almost 10 years ago, the local NFL team, they were having some issues with sleep, and I knew the team physician, and I reached out to him and I said, well, I can come and kind of help you, and he's like, yes, please come in, and that's how my niche practice started. So
that's amazing.
It is because there's this in sports, there's especially in elite sports, there's this Fort Knox effect, which means that you kind of have to go from you work with like student athletes, maybe college athletes before you get to the pro level. So my entry was with the pro athletes. So I started working with a local NFL team. Then I worked with Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA. To be honest, I work with, I've worked with Olympic athletes. I've worked with, what we call soccer, but the world calls football. So I've worked internationally, and yeah, I mean, I just love what I do. And so, yeah.
Well, looking at behind you for our listeners, you can't see this, but those that are viewing, you can see this. But you'll see Dr. Meeta's got a ton of sports memorabilia in her backdrop. Some of that stuff, obviously, well earned as a part of the team. Indeed, a vital part. So, Doc, let's just dive into some really granular stuff. Let's talk a little bit first about the stages of sleep, because I think what people don't understand, for the beginning listeners here, the novices, but we've got again, our listener is all over the world. We've got novice, we've got intermediate, we've got super healthy people and active anti-agers and biohackers. So let's just go 101 to start. The stages of sleep. Tell us a little about the stages.
Okay, so that's a great question, but I want to just go back and talk about what sleep is first. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So sleep is a natural behavior, all from a single-celled creature, which is like has activity and rest to us. We spend 1/3 of our lives in which we're in this where we should be sleeping. And when you're sleeping, there's no information going into your brain and there's no information coming out. And because there's forced inactivity, so rest and recovery happens during that stage. That's what sleep is. So it's a behavior. And when you're sleeping, even though from the outside you look like you're resting, and you are resting, your brain is pretty active. So there are different neurotransmitters being secreted. And if you put on electrodes and you looked at the different brain waves, we can broadly divide sleep into, light sleep, which is stage N1, N2, and deep sleep or delta sleep, and dream sleep or REM sleep. So those are the stages of sleep. Now, light sleep is when what happens when you're falling asleep, and it's still important. And then deep sleep is when your breathing and your blood pressure, your pulse is at its lowest. It's when muscle recovery happens, growth hormone gets secreted. It's where restoration happens. And during your dream sleep or rapid eye movement sleep, there is the function of rapid eye movement sleep is to add emotional context to memory. So whatever you learn during the day, it's during that stage of sleep that we make sense of what happened to us during the day during dream sleep. So different stages of sleep have different functions.
Wow. So, and what is the profitable order? So when someone falls asleep, what generally happens first?
I can tell you are not a novice today, Eric. It looks, obviously you've done your reading. Right. So that's
I've listened to you talk.
Thank you. Well, so this is what Eric is talking about. What he's saying is, so when we fall into sleep, typically people fall into sleep through light sleep. Then they have some amount of deep sleep. And then they have their first bout of dream sleep or REM sleep, REM sleep. And then people actually, your sleep stages lighten and you may actually wake up. So you have a sleep cycle, which is approximately 90 to maybe 110 minutes. So it's approximately that time. So you cycle through different stages of sleep all through the night. And most of your deep sleep happens in the beginning of the night period. And most of your dream sleep happens in the second half or the early morning hours of your nighttime sleep.
Interesting. And when that's happening, people say, and you hear this often, well, I wake up in the middle of the night. So, and that's a lot of our listeners. In fact, that's something that people come to me all the time. I wake up and maybe they have to go to the bathroom or they don't realize they've gone through maybe the cycle and they just happen to wake up and then, maybe it's because they feel their bladder's too full or whatever. And we could talk about that later in another question I'm going to ask you. But when someone does go through a full cycle, you just said, how do they get themselves to repeat the cycle or stay asleep? Like, is it unhealthy if they have that cycle and actually fully wake up?
Well, so that's a really interesting question. The first thing is that, sleep is not something we do, Eric. Sleep is something that happens to us. So as long as you've given yourself ample time in bed, you've gone to bed at a time you are ready to sleep, and it's quiet and dark, etc., once you're asleep, your brain takes care of the sleep stages you need all by itself. So you don't have to do anything. You can cycle through the different stages of sleep automatically. The second part of the question was like, what happens if you wake up? So
Mhm.
waking up in the middle of the night sometimes is not abnormal. It may just be that if you went to bed at 11, by the time 4 o'clock rolls around, most of your sleep drive has been consumed. So you wake up in your natural awakening, you're more aware of those awakenings. So that's that kind of awakening. Sometimes, of course, you may wake up because you you may have to go to the bathroom. You do
Mhm.
want to wake up. You don't want to pee in bed. You don't want to sleep through that. So, so that might wake you up. Or, sometimes people wake up because they're in pain, their environment may be noisy. And so there may be different reasons they are waking up. So that should be evaluated. But
Mhm.
many times what happens is that when people wake up, it's what they do after they wake up that makes it more difficult for them to go back to sleep,
Mm.
right?
So,
So,
what would be best practices if you have that incident where you woke up and you woke up enough where you're alert? What's the
right.
best practice? Next step.
Well, I think that one of the things that people do wrong is like they have this by their bedside, right?
Mm.
So they have a phone. So they wake up, they immediately reach for the phone, they look at the time,
Right.
then they make calculations in their head. I went to bed at this time, it's been this long, and this is what it means. This is how it's going to affect me the next day. That itself, that process, you're like, sending signals to your brain saying, I need to start
Guilty.
thinking. Yes, I am. So that's number one, right? The second thing is the problem is that people don't stop at looking just at the phone, right? You can go onto social media or like, some people will say, well, I'm going to like check an email. I might as well respond right now. And sometimes people wake up and they have like brilliant ideas. Like I gotta like, I have to like text or email my team immediately. Like, so there are things that you can do after you wake up that might prevent you from going back to sleep.
Mm.
Um, and you said best practices. Can I answer that right now? Is that
Please.
okay?
Yeah.
And again, I want to kind of lump this together because with winding down, so there are certain practices that you can do at the beginning of the night, which you can do the same in the middle of the night when you wake up, that actually help you go back to sleep, right? These are all things that actually help you unwind and prepare you for sleeping. And the best analogy I can give you is like if a plane was landing, if an
Mhm.
aeroplane is going and it's about to land, it doesn't just flop to the ground. What it does is it has maneuvers, it lowers its altitude, loses altitude, slows down, and then lands.
Mhm.
So, 30 to 45 minutes before you're going to go to bed, you should perhaps set an alarm, have a hot bath or a shower, um, reading, maybe listening to a relaxing podcast, some stretching activity, breathing exercises, anything, any spiritual exercise, any spiritual practices or meditations.
Okay.
These are things that help you fall asleep. In fact, like having sex, like, sexual activity is actually, it can be really relaxing, helps you
Wow.
fall asleep. Now, so if you wake up in the middle of the night and, let's just say that like somebody doesn't have any sleep apnea, nothing, no disorder that's waking them up, you
Mhm.
can use those same winding down activities that you used before. So maybe doing a meditation, maybe doing some breathing exercises, even you know eh, so not focusing on trying to fall asleep. So commanding yourself to fall asleep, Eric, is the worst thing you can do, right? That's because then all you do is you're watching your clock. You're like, well, I'm not going to go back to sleep. I can't really fall asleep. So it actually mentally is more arousing. So
Mhm.
anything you do relaxing will actually allow you to fall asleep.
So are those I've read about and I've tried certain breathing techniques where I think you breathe in for a 3 or 4 count, you
Yes.
hold it for a 7 count, and you exhale for an 8 count.
Eight.
And again, I don't. And are those numbers precise? What's the science behind that, and what's the theory behind that? Because if someone does it for 3 and 6 and 9 seconds, is it different, or what's the theory behind that? Why does that calm your central nervous system or calm your body?
Yeah, well, so you hit the nerve there because what it's a you hit your answer is right there. What it does is it's like it brings you into a state of relaxation. And you're
Mhm.
right, there's like I don't think there's hard science about 4, 7, or 8. It basically is a breathing technique in which you now focus on your breathing. You could do it while you're awake too, because it kind of helps you calm down. So when you focus on your breathing and you follow a schedule, like you say, I'm going to mentally count to 4, then I'm going to hold
Mhm.
my breath to, again, mentally counting to 7, and then breathe out to 8, and you do it repeatedly. What you're doing is, A, you're focusing on your breathing so you don't think about all those thoughts that were going on in your mind that were preventing you from falling asleep, but also it sort of calms you down. And then if you do that at night, it allows sleep to happen, right? Because you're not focused on falling asleep. You're just focused on the breathing part. So,
Got it. Okay. Well, no, that's helpful because I've done that and I have found it to be very effective. And some of these rituals you're talking about, I've been practicing and I found them to be incredibly helpful personally. Which leads me to a term that I learned from you when I first met you, called sleep hygiene. And I thought that
mhm.
was such an interesting term. Could you just describe a little bit for our listeners what exactly is sleep hygiene and in the context you've described it in the past?
Well, so sleep hygiene is it's a specific thing that like it's actually a scientific term, and it's all the things that you do around your sleep. So it could be related to your environment. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you kept your bedroom cold and dark and quiet, that should sort of help you to sleep, except for like there are some people who would, again, these are broad terms, but you have to kind of individualize them, right? So individually, there might be some people who want like a small nightlight, like at the lowers, because they may not like it to be pitch dark. Some people
Hmm.
like a sound machine, so like a constant humming noise that might actually help them sleep. You want your bedroom, you want your bed to be comfortable, you want your bedroom
Hmm.
to be cool at night, because that's what helps you sleep. Also, there are some things that you can do when it comes to what you take in. So caffeine can
Hmm.
interrupt your sleep if you take it too close to your bedtime. Um, people like to smoke because they think nicotine is relaxing, but actually nicotine is a stimulant and might actually prevent you from sleeping or going into deeper stages of sleep. Everybody knows that alcohol um, might actually help you fall asleep, and it does. But as the night progresses, it fractures your sleep, so it disrupts your sleep, and so you might actually be doing yourself a disservice. So
Hmm.
those are things that can fall in the sleep hygiene category, which is like things around your sleep, in your environment, in what you take in, that might disrupt your sleep without you being aware of it.
Zach, what are your thoughts on? And I've seen so many of these different types of um, assistant devices, and one of them
Mhm.
is those cooling mattresses, for instance,
Mhm.
that cool the temperature. And I've heard different numbers: 68 degrees, 65 degrees, 70 degrees. I mean, I'm learning from you that it seems like it's super personalized
Yes.
to you
Yes.
personally, I guess. But so, what are your thoughts on those cooling mattresses to create that cooler environment for getting that better sleep?
So I mean, I think it's a really good. It's the best way I would describe it is it's a very effective tool for
Mhm.
somebody who has difficulty controlling uh, their temperature at night, right? So what happens is that, especially if you're sleeping with a bed partner, each of them, they may, your bed partner might like it to be warmer or colder. What those beds do is they allow you to control those temperatures, according to what you think is most comfortable. So that's what I would say. But I have to tell you that, and again, like whether how you're going to sleep, everything you do during the day, Eric,
Mhm.
like everything that happens during the day, your high points, your low points, your how you feel emotionally affects how you sleep at night. And then how you
Mhm.
sleep at night affects how you feel the next day. So if you're using a ring to measure your sleep, or if you're using a mattress, all those are just tools. They're
Mhm.
just tools that you might use to see if you can optimize your sleep. Ultimately, sleep is a behavior. And so your people's emotional health, the way that people are, how well adjusted they, etc., they may be, will definitely affect how they're going to sleep at night.
So how does the acronym that has become incredibly popular, I feel, in the last year or so, HRV, or heart rate variability, how does that measuring or that measurement play into the role of how well you're sleeping or how healthy you are?
Okay, well, so that's a really good question, and I'll tell you what I know about it. So HRV is let me think. I want to make it really simple and easy to understand. So HRV is, when our heart is beating, it there's some variability in it normally, and a higher HRV, so the higher the variability, typically, that's a healthy heart. And in addition to that, we have an autonomic nervous system. Like, not don't get confused with these scientific words. Basically, the more relaxed your body is, you're supposed to be in a parasympathetic drive. And that sympathetic, and I always feel like it's so badly named, because when you think of sympathetic system, you think that it would be good for us, but actually it's the fight and flight. Like, it's the it's the autonomically aroused system. Okay. So typically, in the better sleep you've had, the more relaxed you are, the higher the HRV. And so in many of these wearable devices that people have, they've now included one of the variables that are being measured is the heart rate, is HRV. And a high HRV is suggestive of good sleep or a restful sleep. So while a low HRV just means that you were not as well relaxed at night.
Yeah, because that's one I've been starting to pay attention to. And I have found that I have friends that have incredibly high HRVs. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. And I think I'm in pretty good shape. And I'm like, wow, my HRV is, lower. So I'm getting like HRV anxiety. I'm thinking, do I have the wrong HRV? So it's some of these tools and measures, and you've mentioned this, it almost is, it becomes more problematic than good, because some of that data is just overwhelming for some, including people like myself that will obsess over it. I had this conversation with another guest about how we can obsess over our devices. But that's just another data point that I've started to pay attention to. I actually think I've improved it through doing some of the things you've recommended, many, many months ago to me. But I found that, finding and figuring out which part of my personal sleep hygiene needed to be managed improved over time. Of course, everything we're talking about is obviously over time. Which, let me ask you this question, and it may relate to HRV, because what part of sleep gives you the most improvement? I know there's different, and I don't know if there's a right answer. You might tell me that they're all important, but is deep sleep or REM sleep or light sleep, is there one more important to the other? If you could choose which one you wanted to optimize, which would it be first?
Well, I think the easiest way to answer that question is by first letting everybody know that there's no really good way for us to say that I'm going to increase only my deep sleep, I'm going to increase only my dream sleep, right? We really can't do that. And I mean, perhaps there are devices out there that say, well, we're going to help you increase your deep sleep. But generally, if you're increasing one stage of sleep, it's because there's another stage of sleep that is being decreased. So we don't, so I don't know. I don't think there's a good answer out there. I think what you just said, a minute ago is really, really important. I think that if you do common sense good things, which seem, really simple, but as long as you give yourself enough duration to sleep. So as long as you say, well, if I have to wake up at 7 o'clock, I'm going to try to make sure I get into bed by at least by 11 p.m. That gives me around 8 hours of sleep time. I'm going to make sure that my bedroom is calm and quiet. I'm going to do some winding down activity, because that helps me, relax so that I'm ready to sleep. I've sorted my day during the day. Then as long as we do that, it allows your brain to go through different stages of sleep. I mean, and that's the best we can do anyways, because
Right.
we really can't increase a certain stage of sleep. We really can't. There's no good way to do it. Does that make Does
It
that
does,
answer your
yeah.
question?
It's going to lead me to the next question of ways people try to do that, and it's hard to talk about sleep and not talk about some supplementation or sleep supplementation, things like melatonin, and I've learned from people like yourself and some other incredibly smart people in the nutrition wear area that some things are only as good as a certain period of time, and then they become actually counterproductive. So can you talk a little bit about supplementation, things like melatonin, things that some maybe sleep aids that people are using to try to optimize their sleep and may or may not be doing a good justice for themselves?
Well, so if somebody is taking melatonin, and melatonin is it's a hormone that your brain secretes, and it naturally secretes it in darkness, and it sends
Mm-hmm.
a signal to your brain that you're ready to sleep. And we can get melatonin is readily available. At least in the US, you can get it over the counter. And the American Academy of Sleep Medicine says that the one time that melatonin is ineffective is if somebody has a chronic issue with insomnia, which is problems initiating and maintaining sleep, and they've had it for 3 months or longer. Unfortunately, that's the way people use it, right? So people are using it on a regular basis. I think that I think the message for your audience is that if you're taking a supplement to help you sleep, I think the first question is that why are you having difficulty sleeping? I think that's the question that should be answered first. And if you have to take a supplement, perhaps reach out to your primary care provider and talk about why you would need an issue with, like, so for example, if somebody comes in and they have they have significant pain, or and they are having difficulty sleeping because of that, the melatonin is not going to help. You really want to address that pain. Somebody has sleep apnea, that's what you want to do. So in my practice, one of the first things we do is, like, you want to make sure that you do a couple of sleep studies to figure out if they have a diagnosable sleep disorder. So if you're trying to optimize sleep, Eric, again, like the example I'll give you is I work with pro athletes, and if somebody comes in and they have a fractured ankle, but they want to work on their lower limb, you have to diagnose and treat that fractured ankle. And then
Right.
you can work on optimizing that lower limb. I think it's similar to that.
You mentioned sleep study. I tell everybody, get a sleep study. Like I love them. I had 3 of them. I think they're awesome, but because it's just so much information, and you're so shocked at
Yeah.
that they do, and they put the probes all over you. I thought it was fun, but I tell everyone you should get one. It's good information. You get a physical every year. You get your blood drawn, or you get a regular checkup. Sleep studies should be added to that whole list of things you do.
Right. And actually, in my practice now, I do this on large scale. You don't need to go into the sleep lab. You can do a home sleep study. It's really
Oh,
convenient.
wow. I
It's
didn't know that.
Yes,
Wow.
it's really, really convenient. Gives you really good information, enough information for people to make an educated next step. What the next
Mm.
actionable step is. When I rule out something and then go on optimizing it. And I want to just kind of circle back, because you said something really interesting a little while ago, in which you talked about how people become obsessed with data. And we do live in a world where everybody wants to collect information.
Hmm.
And for many people, it's really simple. They look at, like for you, like you said, you looked at your HRV and said, what can I do to make this better? Right? That would be a healthy way to look at it. But sometimes people become obsessed about that data. And they're like, well, and for sometimes it makes people anxious. So for people who already have anxiety about sleeping, you now give them information which says they sleep poorly. They're like, oh my God, like now they have performance anxiety about sleep. And so that's just something to pay attention to too.
Oh, I agree. So we talked, about sleep. It's hard to talk about sleep without talking about how do we wake up. I mean, people say, I wake up, I feel groggy, and they'll grab caffeine right away. They'll go for an energy drink or coffee or whatever it is. I know what my personal habits have, and I've changed them. I've iterated this because I train in the morning now. So I'm like, well, how am I going to get this energy to train? And so understanding adenosine and the role that it plays. Could you get a little in the weeds and a little granular on what happens when we wake up?
Okay. So the first thing is, again, I'm going to back up because you use the word adenosine, right? So there are two things that decide how sleepy or alert you're going to be in a 24-hour period. The first, of course, is your sleep drive. So the longer you stay awake, the sleepier you're going to be. So that's really simple to understand. But we also have a clock in our brain. It's called the circadian clock. And that circadian clock, it basically is a clock that all of us have in our brain that like it keeps time for over 24 hours, and it decides whether you're a night owl or a morning person. So for example, I am definitely a morning person. I don't know about you, Eric. Like what time do you like to go to bed? Like if you didn't have anywhere to go, and what time would you like to wake up?
Most of my career, I was a night person. I would go to bed 2, 3 a.m. I built 2 businesses in the wee hours of the evening.
Yeah.
But in the last 3 years, I've become a morning person, but due to just a discipline. I said, I'm going to try and wake up at 5 a.m. So I shifted. So now I am a morning person. And I got to tell you, I actually like it. I like getting to bed a little earlier, but I love being up before the sun rises so I can get a few things done, and I have a really nice curriculum. So I've been both. I think naturally I prefer staying up at night, but I have disciplined myself to switch. So okay. I'm a little bit of a unicorn on that question.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you're a very successful person. You've almost, burnt the candle on both ends. Is I think a very effective diagnosis that I've just made for you. But yeah, I think that. So people have different bedtimes in which they're like, in which they like to go to sleep and then kind of wake up. So when it comes to waking up in the morning, how alert you're going to be when you wake up depends on many things. Like it depends on whether you had a full night of sleep or not, and that also depends on your circadian clock. So, for example, if I like to go to bed at between 10:30 and 11 and wake up between 6 and 6:30. So, 6:30 when I wake up, I feel really refreshed. But if, if my teenagers like to go to bed at midnight or 1, they'd like to sleep in at 8 or 9. So if they had to wake up at 6 o'clock, they're really groggy because it's not that time to wake up, right? Does that make sense? So yes. That decides it. But so when you wake up in the morning, it's a real myth that people think that you wake up and you're like, jump out of the bed and you're full of energy. Most people don't do that. So it does take a while to get going. And, my recommendation is like not to reach for the phone immediately because then that can be stressful. The other thing is, so not look at the telephone. Then there are different schools of thought about caffeine intake. I'll come to that. But you want to, like when you wake up in the morning, and it's easy for you in Florida, you want to be exposed to nice, bright sunlight, especially in the morning. It sort of resets your circadian clock. So you want to do that. If you are, if you drink, I drink coffee actually within 15, 20 minutes of waking up. There are schools of thought that said you can wait for a little while. Again, it's an individual thing. And again, I personally don't like to have stringent rules. I want to be able to. I want people to have the flexibility to see what works for them, and then decide, what's going to be the best way forward. With only one caveat, and that caveat is that sleep disorders just by their very nature is something that you yourself may not be aware of. So people can have really bad sleep apnea or a different sleep disorder, but they may have no idea because they're asleep, and their next day, even though they're tired, this is their normal. So they think, well, it's kind of normal to walk around feeling fatigued. It's always best. That's why that sleep study becomes important, because you want to make sure that undiagnosed sleep disorders do get discovered.
So many people that are walking around with sleep, and it's incredible. I mean, I learned a lot about sleep apnea in the last decade, and there are so many people that they'll say things. You're like, oh gosh, you definitely got to get a sleep study because you're saying every symptom of sleep apnea. Your blood pressure is high. You're waking up gasping for air. I mean, they're like, this is like whole And everyone thinks, oh, it's for people that are obese or overweight generally have it. I mean, people that are in incredibly good shape have sleep apnea. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so Doc, we always like to give our listeners a couple of actionable takeaways whenever we do our podcast. So what would your 1, 2, or 3 actionable takeaways that they can start today doing?
Okay, so the first I would say would be in what people put into their bodies. So, for example, that would be for caffeine, and other stimulants like nicotine. And so you want to be careful not only the amount that you're taking it, but how close to your bedtime you might take it, because that might prevent you from falling asleep or going into the deeper stages of sleep.
And on that timing, Doc, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what is that recommended timeline? Because people ask me that all the time. Like, hey, when should I stop, drinking coffee during the day, or my energy? If I'm working out in the gym in the afternoon, I have an energy drink. When should I not do that, or can I do that?
Actually, so that is such a good question. So broadly speaking, caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours, right? Which means that if you drink if you drink one like at 7 o'clock before an NBA game, to the NBA athletes, by 11 o'clock, half of it is still in your system. 5 hours later, another half of it is in your system. But Eric, again, this is where complexity comes in. And this is why, that's why when you're optimizing sleep, it has to be individual. Some people are fast metabolizers, some are slow metabolizers. So you kind of have to figure out how to take it so that you can still fall asleep. Then the second category would be something like alcohol or THC, etc. So you want to make sure that, because it may be disrupting your sleep later in the night. Okay. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news to say, actually jokingly, and do not listen to me when I say this, but I jokingly say that, when it comes to sleep, maybe the best time to start drinking is for lunch, drinking alcohol, because that way it's really out of your system. But that's not what we're recommending here, right, Eric? That was just a joke.
Absolutely.
The second thing is light. And so the next category is light. And I want to start out by saying you want to have good exposure to bright light during the day. That helps set your circadian clock. And then again, your body likes darkness. Your brain likes darkness at night. So you want it to be dark, which automatically means your phones, right? So there's light exposure that comes from these LED, backlit phones. You want to minimize that use at night. The third category, which I think is really important and people ignore, is that winding down schedule, which kind of helps you relax, ready to go to sleep. Because most people, especially the people who are listening to you, they want to optimize their day. And oftentimes people are on the go, and they never get a chance to sit down and relax during the day. So when they get into bed at night, their minds are going at, 90 miles an hour. They cannot stop thinking. They're problem solving for things. They have unresolved issues. So you want to try and build that during your day. During the day, for every 90 minutes to 90 minutes of hard work, you want a few minutes of relaxation in which you don't have the phone. This should involve community. Maybe you're walking outside. Kind of helps you relax so that you try to resolve the issues during the day itself. That helps you fall asleep at night.
That's incredible. Great advice, Dr. Singh. And again, this is some of the advice you've given to me. So I'm so appreciative. You work with athletes, high performance human beings, executive CEOs, guys like myself, men and women that you've really increased their performance light years. The stories are endless and they're great. And if we had more time, we'd make this a long form podcast and tell all of them. But in the meantime, where can our listeners and viewers find you? Where are you on social media if they want to follow you or check you out or learn more about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn as well as Twitter, as well as Instagram. My handle, and I'll send all those handles to you so you can embed it in here. Meeta Singh, MD. And always happy to answer questions. And, thanks for the work you're doing, Eric. Thank you for trying to bring awareness to this issue, as well as all the other preventive care issues that you bring awareness to. Really, I mean, we really need to step away from trying to treat diseases, but focus on keeping people healthy and productive. I mean, that's what you want to do. And, you want people to live longer and be healthy, to increase health span as well as lifespan. So thank you.
Doctor, you closed my podcast for me. So with that being said, everyone, thank you for joining us for another incredible episode of Aging Backward and Growing Forward. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And Dr. Singh, thank you again for joining us. And I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. I look forward to seeing you next time.